Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to set out a few things about how referenda work and don't work in the UK, as well as aspects of the Brexit referendum that people keep getting wrong. But first, if you find yourself enjoying the video, then please consider clicking the like button and subscribing to the channel. So, what is a referendum? It's a question or potentially series of questions put to the electorate in order to inform Parliament of the general national feeling on a particular topic. And in the UK, that's it. That is all there is to it. In fact, in the UK, no real thought has traditionally been put into referenda, so much so that when David Cameron became Prime Minister and it started to look like he was going to be throwing out a few of them, a Lords Select Committee had a bit of a debate and came up with some points to bear in mind. The main conclusion that they drew was that referenda in the UK are not consistently applied and are used as a tactical device rather than on matters of constitutional principle. This is certainly true of the Brexit referendum. There was no great call for it in Parliament. Opinion polls in the country didn't show a majority wanted to leave the EU. It was pursued purely as a device to prevent UKIP nicking a few Tory seats in Westminster, and because David Cameron wasn't strong enough to face down the hardliners in his own party in the way that previous Conservative Prime Ministers had been. Counterpoint this with Switzerland, where referenda are common practice, well established and binding. There are roughly 4 referenda a year in Switzerland, and the Swiss can vote on several proposals each time. And one important feature of a Swiss referendum is that the electorate must be given the correct facts with which to make their decision. In circumstances that might almost be a form of divine intervention to show just how badly the UK arranges them, the Swiss rejected the result of a referendum for the first time in its history earlier this year. The referendum itself took place back in 2016, but the Supreme Court determined that voters had not been given the full facts. It violated the freedom of the vote. And it was as simple as that. The electorate were given incorrect information, so they must now rerun the referendum with the correct information. No ifs or buts about it. Yes, the side that won the original referendum are whining about it, but nobody said the Swiss don't have the same human instincts as the UK, they just have better systems to cope with it. So David Cameron authorised a referendum for party political purposes, not for the first time, so a Referendum Act needed to be passed by Parliament. And here we come to another misunderstood feature. People in the UK seem to think that the referendum result was an instruction to Parliament. It was not. Don't get me wrong, I understand why people think that. David Cameron told them so, but he was lying. Parliament make decisions. Though constitutional changes should probably have a referendum, that does not circumvent the authority of Parliament, which is the sovereign power in the UK. The Act itself instructs on all aspects of the referendum. It sets out, for example, acceptable donations to the various campaigning groups, which were breached by several, most notably the 2 largest pro-Brexit groups, where many millions of pounds of funds was illegally used, whole pages of terms that they may as well not bothered with in the Act, because various Brexiteers wiped their arses with those pages and nothing was done about it. But what the Act didn't do, anywhere in its 67 pages, was to make the result binding. And going back to the 2010 Lords Select Committee, the report made clear why. So that report back in 2010 said, and I quote, "Because of the sovereignty of Parliament, referendums cannot be legally binding in the UK and are therefore advisory. However, it would be difficult for Parliament to ignore a decisive expression of public opinion." So legally it is not an instruction to Parliament. It makes no difference what any politician says for their own political purposes. That is the legal fact of the matter. The quote did note that the political difficulty in ignoring a decisive result. Obviously, why bother issuing a referendum if you're going to ignore the result? That's just like pissing the people off. But that still doesn't make it legally binding. Besides, what is a decisive expression of public opinion? 52% of people who voted? Even Brexiteers such as Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nigel Farage were saying that such a margin wasn't decisive before the result was announced. 37% of the actual electorate, that's who voted to leave. That's certainly not a decisive expression of public opinion. 26% of the actual UK voting to leave. That just gets worse. Then we come to the issue of what people voted for. Before the referendum, everyone on both sides campaigned to remain within the single market. On the Remain side, it was to remain within the single market and the whole EU. On the Leave side, it was to remain within the single market, but outside of the EU. Every Brexit campaign said we'd be remaining in the single market. It was non-negotiable. There weren't even considerations for that not being the case. Fast forward 3 years and those same people who insist they know what they voted for are saying they voted to leave the single market. Well, not only did that not feature in the question, either explicitly or implied, but nobody, and I mean nobody, was campaigning for that before the result was announced. There were also a great many lies given to the electorates who persuade them to vote leave, which a Swiss court would have thrown out immediately. So why don't the British courts? Well, it's because referenda in Switzerland are binding, but they are not in the UK. This very issue of sovereignty is what allows the Brexiteers to claim that it was a binding referendum, whilst at the same time keeping their illegally won prize. If the vote were legally binding, then the courts would throw it out and force a rerun. When the issue was taken to the UK courts, the judgment was that the vote was illegal, but because it was only advisory, all they could do was issue fines to the perpetrators, not cancel the result. But because Brexit has always been about party politics, Parliament itself did not discard the result, but went with it. It's very much like why the Democrats are not impeaching Donald Trump. It's all party politics. Now, in the case of Parliament in our case, it was a pretty half-hearted, uncompromising fashion with which they went along with it, and that has resulted in this hellish scene of purgatory that we have in the UK. So we have a situation now where roughly 90 MPs who desperately want us to break away from the EU completely are somehow able to hold sway over the 550 MPs who wish to avoid this. This is because they are effectively holding a primed grenade and threatening to release it in their midst. The fact that they would suffer from the blast as well doesn't seem to be entering into the equation. Think Princess Leia in Jabba's palace. Yeah, that's it. Boris Johnson is Princess Leia. But I don't think anyone's going to force him into a bikini, don't worry. So the Brexit referendum came into being only because of party politics. Neither a majority of Parliament wanted it, nor a majority of the country. The referendum was not legally binding, as has been made clear by anyone who ever dug a bit deeper than believing what a politician would say. It was also run illegally, with cyber attacks on millions of British voters, and illegally used funds by several groups, including the two largest Leave groups. And it has now crippled our politics because there is a massive disconnect between the real legal and constitutional position, which politicians can't ignore, and what the general public believes is the position, which politicians also can't ignore. And because Parliament and government don't think it's in their interest to ensure that the public understands the reality of the situation, we continue in this impasse with everyone hoping that someone else will ride into town and sort the mess out. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please click on the Patreon link to find out further details. And until next time, I'll see you later.